The cold tile against my cheek felt almost comforting, which frightened me more than the pain twisting in my stomach. I lay curled on my bathroom floor, sweat dripping down my neck, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The light above the mirror flickered in and out, making the room pulse faintly, like it was breathing with me. I tried to move my arm, but it trembled so violently that my hand barely slid an inch across the tile. My phone sat on the counter just above me, close enough to see, too far to reach, and between us, placed with almost delicate intention, was an empty box of chocolates. Glossy gold paper, satin ribbon ripped open, every piece gone. Beside it, a small card in familiar handwriting read, "To the sweetest mom, you deserve a treat." Vanessa. I swallowed hard, bile rising in my throat. My body cramped again, forcing a low groan out of me. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a sensitive stomach or one of your spells, as Vanessa liked to call them. Something was very wrong. My name is Evelyn Harris. I'm 76 years old, and this happened less than 2 weeks ago. The night my daughter-in-law decided to send me a gift that nearly put all of us in the hospital. I tried again to reach for the counter. My fingers clawed at the air uselessly. The room spun. I focused on the box. The elegant design, the expensive brand, the kind of confection Vanessa never bought me unless she wanted to make a point. A sour taste coated my tongue. I knew foodborne illness. I knew symptoms. I knew timing. 40 years as a nurse had taught me enough to recognize a pattern, even while collapsing on my own bathroom floor. But I could barely keep my eyes open long enough to think. A thud echoed from my front door. Someone was knocking hard. A neighbor, maybe. The sound grew distant as my vision blurred into gray at the edges. The last thing I heard before I slipped under was the shattering crack of my phone falling from the counter when I tried one final time to pull myself up. Then everything went dark. I woke to the sharp rising wail of sirens. Not from memory. They were right outside the ambulance, vibrating through the walls, rattling in my ears. My body felt heavy, sluggish, like it wasn't mine anymore. A paramedic adjusted the IV line taped to my arm and leaned close. "Ma'am, stay with me. You had a severe reaction. We're taking you to County General." My mouth felt dry as paper. "The chocolates," I whispered. "We'll check everything," he said. "Just focus on breathing." But it wasn't the pain that startled me awake. It was the moment the ambulance doors swung open at the hospital and I heard a nurse say, "That's the third call tonight tied to the same family." My eyes snapped open. Third? As they wheeled me through the hallway, I struggled to lift my head. There, down the corridor, I caught a glimpse of someone familiar. My son's coat, crumpled, in his hands. A nurse guiding one of my grandkids into a room. A figure hunched on a bench, pale and shaking. Vanessa. My stomach clenched, not from illness this time, but from understanding. Whatever was in those chocolates. I wasn't the only one who ate them. A nurse with a clipboard stopped beside my stretcher. "We're noting a pattern," she murmured to another staff member. "All stomach pain, all within the same hour, all from the same household group." The staff exchanged looks. Food contamination? Possibly. Or something added. Could be accidental. Could be. Their voices dipped lower as they rolled me into an exam room, but I didn't need to hear the rest. I knew what they were thinking. I knew what I was thinking. And while Vanessa sat somewhere in this ER, sick from the same chocolates she sent me, I lay under the harsh hospital lights, realizing whatever she had intended for me. She hadn't planned on it touching her or her children. The nurse adjusted my blanket, unaware of the storm forming quietly in my chest. This wasn't just illness. This wasn't coincidence. Something far worse had begun, and no one in this family would be able to hide it anymore. The hospital released me the next afternoon with medications, papers, and a warning to take it easy. I nodded politely. though I wasn't sure how one was supposed to take it easy when the world had shifted under their feet just hours earlier. My son, Michael, insisted on driving me home. He hovered, not out of tenderness, but out of a nervous guilt he didn't quite know how to manage. "Mom, you really scared us," he said as he unlocked my apartment door. "You could have, it could have been worse." I eased into my kitchen chair and watched him fuss over the refrigerator, tossing out leftovers as if they were to blame. I wanted to ask him what the kids ate, what Vanessa ate, what he saw that night, but he didn't stop moving long enough for me to get a word in. "I'm fine," I finally said. "This isn't my first stomach episode." He froze for a second. "Yeah," he muttered, "you've had a few this year." Not true. But as I would soon learn, repeating a thing makes it feel true to the person saying it. Michael had always been a kind boy, shy, sensitive. He was the child who brought me wilted dandelions in sweaty hands, the one who cried when his goldfish died, the one who refused to sleep unless I checked under the bed for monsters. I raised him and his sister through double shifts as a nurse, packed lunches at dawn, kept our tiny home running even when my feet throbbed from a 12-hour shift. I did everything a mother could do, the kind of everything no one sees but everyone benefits from. But motherhood changes as children grow. Sometimes it softens, sometimes it strains. With Michael, it drifted. He married young, fell in love hard, and built his world around his new family. It wasn't wrong. It just meant that slowly I became a guest in the life I had once been the center of. Still, I tried to be helpful. I watched the kids whenever Vanessa needed a break. I sent soup on cold evenings. I kept their spare keys, their extra mail, their emergency contacts. I did the things mothers do even when no one remembers to say thank you. But the more I gave, the more Vanessa pulled back. At first, it was small comments. "Evelyn, you don't have to come over so much. You worry too much about the kids. You're old-fashioned, Mom. Let us handle it." At the time, I brushed it off as stress. She had 2 young children, a demanding job, and a home that always seemed to need something. Her tone was sharp, but I had worked with enough overwhelmed young parents to recognize strain disguised as annoyance. Then came the jokes, if you could call them that. "Careful, or she'll move in and take over the house," she'd say, laughing at family dinners. "Oh, Evelyn's forgetting things again. It's cute." "You'll outlive all of us," she once told me while rolling her eyes. "Stubbornness is a survival skill." I smiled. I always smiled. You learn to do that as you age, especially around younger people who believe humor buys them permission to say what they mean without sounding cruel. Michael rarely corrected her. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he looked embarrassed. But he never stopped her. The thing about slow disrespect is that it doesn't feel like danger. It feels like exhaustion. You keep explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand. You keep forgiving things you shouldn't. You keep believing the best in people who show you their worst in tiny pieces. Months before the chocolate incident, those pieces had started forming a pattern. Vanessa suggested I give her access to my online banking so she could help schedule payments. She reorganized my medication cabinet to make sure I didn't mix anything up. She added herself as the secondary contact at my doctor's office, just in case you forget things. And when I told her I didn't need that kind of help, she laughed lightly and said, "You're adorable, Evelyn. Really. But this is how families do it now." I let it go. I shouldn't have. One afternoon, I overheard her telling Michael, "She's not as sharp as she thinks she is. You'll see." That was the first time the air felt different. Heavy, intentional, calculated. But I still chose to ignore it because ignoring is easier than accusing your own child's spouse of slowly pushing you out of your own life. Then the day came when one of the kids knocked over a ceramic bowl I loved, one I'd had since nursing school. When I gently reminded them to be careful, Vanessa swooped in. "Oh, Evelyn," she said with a sigh, "you know they're just kids. Maybe some things shouldn't be lying around, especially now." Especially now. 2 words that stayed with me. as if I had become a hazard, as if my belongings were better off packed away, as if I was 1 inch closer to being a person whose things, choices, and independence were negotiable. I felt something shift in me that day, a quiet ache, a warning. But I dismissed it. I always dismiss things that felt too heavy to confront. Then came the night she sent the chocolates, and everything that had been whispered, hinted at, and softened with forced sweetness began to sharpen into something far more dangerous than disrespect. The week after the hospital incident, I noticed the shift more clearly, not just from Vanessa, from Michael too. They hovered more. They watched more. They questioned more. And not in the way loving families do when they're concerned, in the way people do when they're gathering evidence. Michael showed up one morning with a forced cheerfulness that didn't match the tightness in his jaw. "Mom, I think we should look at simplifying things for you." Simplifying. Another soft word with hard intentions. "What things?" I asked. "Bills, groceries, maybe setting up auto shipments for your medications. Vanessa said you mixed up your cholesterol pills last month." I felt my stomach drop. That never happened, but it didn't matter. It had been said aloud, meaning it could now be treated as truth. I told him calmly, "I've managed my medications for more than 40 years. I haven't mixed anything." He nodded politely, but the skepticism in his eyes was unmistakable. Later that afternoon, my doctor's office called to confirm an update to my records. Vanessa had listed herself as my primary decision-maker for routine care. "Is this correct, Ms. Harris?" the receptionist asked. "It absolutely is not," I told her. I fixed it immediately. But the fact that it had been attempted stayed with me. The next few days were filled with small interruptions of my routine. Interruptions that slowly boxed in the edges of my independence. A neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, pulled me aside outside the mailroom. "Your daughter-in-law told me you weren't feeling steady on your feet lately. If you ever need someone to check on you, let me know." Unsteady, not steady, not stable. I smiled kindly, but inside something cold trickled through me. Vanessa wasn't just commenting at home anymore. She was spreading a narrative. I decided to keep my own log, an old habit from my nursing days. Names, dates, times, comments. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Records keep emotion from blurring truth. One afternoon, I visited Michael's house to see the grandchildren. The moment I walked in, I sensed tension. Their daughter, little Aria, hid behind the couch. Their older son, Caleb, wouldn't meet my eyes. "What's wrong?" I asked gently. Vanessa stepped in. "They're just tired. And honestly, Evelyn, last week really scared them. They thought you were dying on the bathroom floor. Caleb cried all night." She said it loud enough for them to hear, placing the weight of her accusation directly on my shoulders. "That wasn't my fault," I said quietly. She shrugged. "Well, incidents happen, and when they do, it affects the whole family. Maybe we need to think about boundaries and safer arrangements." Safer arrangements. There it was. She wasn't hiding her intentions anymore. I looked over at the kitchen counter. My empty chocolate box sat in the trash, folded neatly. Vanessa must have kept it after the hospital. Part of me wondered why. Control. Narrative. Convenience. The next week, my phone calls from friends became fewer. When I finally reached my old church friend Lillian, she said, "Vanessa mentioned you've been having a hard time lately. I didn't want to overwhelm you." There it was again. A story being shaped without my involvement. I asked her gently, "What did she say?" "Oh, just that you had some confusion, that you should rest more. I didn't want to intrude." Confusion. The word stuck in my throat. The world around me was being rearranged by someone else's hands. I tried to talk to Michael privately. He listened, but a shadow passed over his face. "Mom, you've been having moments. The doctors said dehydration can cause mental slips at your age." "My age," I repeated softly. It hurt more coming from him than from anyone else. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was trying to be a good husband in a story Vanessa had written long before he realized he was acting in it. He hugged me goodbye and left. I stood alone in my living room, the quiet pressing close around me. That was the night I went through my cabinets. I checked every medication. I checked every food label. I checked the trash. And then I found it. The chocolate box. Empty. Except for a small torn corner of a wrapper tucked beneath the folds. A faint scent. Wrong. Chemical tinged, not like any confection I'd known. I didn't jump to conclusions. Nurses don't do that. We observe, we compare, we wait. So I placed the box in a sealed bag and tucked it into my closet. Not out of paranoia, out of preparedness. The next day, a social worker named Claire Benson showed up at my door. She smiled politely. "I'm here for a wellness check. Your family requested it." My heart tightened, but I stepped aside and let her in. She walked through my small apartment, taking notes. "Your daughter-in-law described several concerning incidents," she said. "Falls, confusion, trouble managing medication." None of it was true. I explained my history, my independence, my health. Claire nodded, listening intently, a calm face, steady eyes. She had that look of someone who had seen this pattern too many times. "Do you feel safe living alone?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She paused. "Do you feel someone is trying to make others think you shouldn't be?" I met her eyes. That was the moment the ground shifted for me, because someone finally asked the right question. Someone saw the shape of what was happening before I could fully articulate it myself. When she left, I closed the door and rested my hand against it. The house was quiet, too quiet, almost staged. That was when it hit me fully. The slow drip of lies forming a river strong enough to move me from my home if I didn't act carefully. I stared out the window as dusk gathered outside. The streetlights flicked on, the shadows deepened, and I realized something simple, chilling, and true. This wasn't about illness. This wasn't about care. This wasn't about concern. This was about control. And I had no idea yet how far Vanessa was willing to go to take it. The shift from whispers to public damage happened faster than I expected. It began with a family meeting I hadn't agreed to attend. Michael asked me to come over just to talk things through. But when I walked into their living room, the air had the heavy, rehearsed tension of an intervention. Vanessa sat on the far end of the sofa, arms crossed, pretending to look exhausted. Her mother was there too, perched upright like she had been summoned as a character witness. Even the children sensed something unusual. They hovered near the stairs, peeking down with wide eyes until Vanessa snapped her fingers and sent them away. Michael gestured to a chair across from them. "Mom, please sit." His tone wasn't unkind, just strained. Strained in the way a person sounds when they've already been told what to believe. I lowered myself into the chair. Vanessa inhaled dramatically. "Evelyn, we're worried about you." I didn't react. I wanted to hear the script. She continued, "After what happened with the chocolates, you really scared us all. You could have hurt yourself. You could have died." Her mother nodded sagely as if she had personally witnessed my collapse on the bathroom floor. I kept my voice calm. "Everyone else got sick, too. That's not the point," Vanessa said quickly. "The point is you've had episodes. More than one." I looked at Michael. "You know that isn't true." But he didn't meet my eyes. Vanessa leaned forward, hands clasped. "We think it's time to consider assisted living. Somewhere you'll be safe. Somewhere professionals can watch you." Safe. Watched. Managed. Removed. I felt the words settle like stones in my stomach. "I don't need assisted living," I said softly. Her smile tightened. "That's what everyone says at first." Then she stood up and walked into the kitchen. When she returned, she carried a folder, thick, organized, far too prepared for something she claimed was a spontaneous family conversation. She pulled out printed papers. "Here," she said, handing them to Michael. "These are the notes I've kept. Dates, incidents, mistakes. Mistakes." I watched Michael scan the list. One line read, "Evelyn confused her evening pills." Another, "Left stove on." Another, "Fell in the hallway and didn't remember the fall." Lies, every single one of them. Fabricated moments written in neat bullet points. "This isn't real," I told him, but Vanessa interrupted before he could answer. "Mom, we know this is hard to hear, but the professionals can help you. You wouldn't be alone." Her voice was syrupy, overly gentle, the tone she used in her videos when explaining elder decline signs. I felt a tremor in my chest, not from fear, but from anger held too tightly. Then she added, "And the apartment, well, if we sell it, that money can cover long-term care, and whatever's left can go to the kids. You always said you wanted to help their future." There it was, the point. Not care, not safety, not concern. Asset, money, control. Michael swallowed hard. "Mom, think about it. Maybe it's best." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy who once trusted me completely now standing firmly in someone else's version of me. I stood slowly, not dramatic, not emotional, just steady. "I'm going home," I said. Vanessa sighed in frustration, but I ignored her. I walked to the door alone, letting the silence between us speak more clearly than anything I could have said. I heard their whispered voices as I put on my shoes. "She's being stubborn," Vanessa hissed. "She's scared," Michael replied. "Fear is dangerous at her age," Vanessa said. "This is exactly why we need to take action." Action. The word chilled me. The meeting didn't end the way they wanted, but it accomplished what it was meant to. It cracked something in the public perception of me. The next day, Vanessa's mother called one of my church friends to check in. 2 hours later, that friend called me, her tone gentle, almost pitying. "Sweetheart, I didn't realize things were getting so bad." So bad. The rumor had gained legs, and those legs ran fast. The final blow came at my doctor's appointment that week. The moment I sat down, my doctor glanced at Vanessa's notes. Yes, she had sent them, and spoke over me during nearly the entire exam. "Evelyn, these reports raise concern," she said. "Your family describes confusion, falls, difficulty managing routine tasks." I felt my jaw tighten. "Those are fabrications." She hesitated but didn't fully believe me, because doubt, once seeded, grows quickly. I left the clinic humiliated, my competence questioned, my voice diminished, and my autonomy slipping away in the eyes of others. As I walked to my car, the ground under me tilted just slightly. Not from illness, not from age, but from the realization that I was no longer fighting minor insults. I was fighting a narrative, and I was losing. The lowest point didn't come with drama. It came quietly, delivered through a letter slipped under my door 2 mornings later. A notice from my landlord, a request for a meeting, a concern about tenant safety. My heart dropped. Vanessa had gone further. I called the number at the bottom of the page and scheduled the earliest appointment I could. When I arrived, the landlord looked uncomfortable, almost apologetic. "Your family reached out," he said. "They expressed concerns about your ability to live independently. They mentioned a medical emergency, a fall, and—" He paused, searching my face. Possible confusion. The words washed over me like cold water. I told him the truth, calmly, thoroughly, the way nurses explain diagnoses. I wasn't confused. I hadn't fallen. I hadn't mismanaged anything. But it didn't matter, because Vanessa had provided documentation. Documentation always outweighs a voice. He handed me a pamphlet for an assisted living facility. "Just consider options," he said. I thanked him and walked out with my dignity folding in on itself. By the time I reached home, my legs felt weak. Not from illness, from grief. I sat on my sofa and stared at the framed photograph of Michael and Vanessa holding their first baby. I remembered standing behind the delivery room door that day, clutching a bouquet, crying tears of joy. Now I cried for an entirely different reason. That afternoon, Michael stopped by again. He looked worn, stressed, almost fragile. "Mom, you need help," he began, his voice soft but firm. "You can't keep pretending everything's fine." "I have been fine," I said. "I am fine. Your wife is creating a version of me that doesn't exist." He rubbed his temples. Why would she lie? That sentence hurt deeper than any insult could have. "For convenience," I said. "For control. For relief from responsibilities she resents. Take your pick." He stood up abruptly. "This is pointless. You're not listening." "No," I said quietly. "You're not seeing." He turned away from me. "If we have to get legal help to keep you safe, we will." Legal help, my own son, against me. I felt something inside me fracture. Later that evening, I found myself staring at my medication bottles, untouched on the counter. The ambulance had taken me away before I could tidy the bathroom. The empty chocolate box still sat inside a bag in my closet. I opened it. I stared at the torn wrapper corner again, smelled the faint chemical scent again, felt the memory of the pain rolling through my body again. And for the first time since that night, I allowed myself to understand the truth. Someone had wanted me sick. Maybe not dead, but sick enough to appear frail, sick enough to justify a move, a sale, a signature, sick enough to make me look incapable. And that someone was the woman who signed the note. "To the sweetest mom, you deserve a treat." The realization broke something steady inside me. I sank to the floor of my living room and cried, quietly, the way older women do when they don't want the neighbors to hear the sound of their heartbreak. I believed, for a few heavy minutes, that everything was already lost. My home, my independence, my reputation, my son, my grandchildren, my future. I believed the chapter was already written, signed, finished. And I thought, for the first time in my life, that maybe I was too tired to fight what was coming. But grief has a strange way of turning into clarity. When the tears finally dried, I sat up slowly, wiped my face, and looked at the sealed bag in my hands. I wasn't done. Not yet. Because the one thing Vanessa didn't count on was that I had been a nurse for 4 decades, and I knew how to document. I knew how to observe. I knew how to uncover truth. They thought they had broken me, but they had only pushed me to the point where the only direction left was forward. The shift inside me didn't start with anger. It started with silence, the kind of silence that comes when a woman realizes she is the last witness left who believes her own truth. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning, the sunlight weakly stretching across the surface, catching on the bagged chocolate box resting in front of me. For the first time in days, my mind felt steady. Not calm, exactly. Just clear. I had spent my entire adult life documenting symptoms, patterns, and behaviors. I knew how to take what looked like chaos and break it into facts. I wasn't losing myself. I wasn't confused. I wasn't declining. I was being rewritten. And now I needed to write back. I retrieved a small notebook from the drawer under the microwave. It was nothing fancy. Soft cover, blue ink, pages slightly curled from age. I had used these notebooks all through my nursing years. Every patient, every shift, every unexpected pattern had passed through these pages in one form or another. I opened to the first blank sheet and wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote the first sentence of my investigation. This is what actually happened. I listed the timeline of the chocolate incident, the packaging, the symptoms, the ambulance ride, the 3 emergency calls. I recorded exactly what the paramedics had said, exactly what the nurse had whispered, exactly what I saw in the ER hallway when the children were doubled over with the same symptoms I had suffered. Then I wrote Vanessa's name, not emotionally, clinically. Next, I walked quietly into my bedroom and retrieved the chocolate box, still sealed in the plastic bag the hospital staff had given me when they returned my belongings. I placed it on the table. Its gold wrapper looked out of place against the plain wood. Too elegant, too deliberate, too carefully chosen. I took photos from every angle. Top, bottom, inside, ribbon, card with her handwriting, torn wrapper corner. Then I photographed the expiration date and the brand logo, and the bag number printed on the bottom. I didn't know exactly what had been in those chocolates, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Foodborne illness doesn't hit 4 different people with identical timing and identical symptoms unless the contamination source is the same. And if the children and Vanessa got sick hours later, that meant the pattern was consistent. I continued writing, building my log, a detailed record of conversations, Vanessa's comments, Michael's warnings, the landlord meeting, the fabricated incident list. Pattern by pattern, the shape of the betrayal emerged. Around noon, I made a decision. I picked up my phone and called the one person who had never once doubted my judgment, Sophia. We had worked together for years, 2 nurses on the same floor surviving endless double shifts, chaotic nights, impossible holiday staffing. She had retired before me and moved only a few streets away. When she heard my voice, she didn't ask if I was sick. She didn't ask if I was confused. She said, "Tell me everything." So I did. There was no gasp or dramatic pause on her end, only a long, steady exhale. "That's not an accident," she said quietly. "You know that, and I know that." "I need help documenting," I said. "Real documentation." "I'll be there in 10 minutes. She arrived wearing her old denim jacket, a thermos of tea in one hand, a file folder in the other, like she was clocking in for a shift again. For the next hour, she helped me organize the timeline, the medical symptoms, and the photos with professional precision. Then she said, "This is going to sound harsh, but listen, you need outside eyes, someone who can look at this without family ties." "Who?" I asked. "Adult Protective Services. Not to accuse anyone yet, just to get your concerns logged officially." I hesitated. "Michael will think I'm attacking his family." Sophia shook her head. "You're protecting yourself, nothing more." Her conviction steadied me. We drafted a factual, concise statement. No emotion, no accusations, just patterns, illness timing, family pressure, and documentation inconsistencies. After Sophia left, I continued working alone. I found myself reaching for one more item, something I hadn't touched in years, the locking box under my bed. Inside it were my marriage documents, insurance papers, old beneficiary forms, and the deed to my apartment. I reviewed each one, reading with clinical eyes. What I found surprised me. The deed showed something Vanessa clearly didn't know. My property had an automatic transfer clause. Not to my son, not to my daughter-in-law, but to a trust my late husband and I had set up long ago. A trust that required a third-party manager unless I personally named a new one. They couldn't sell the apartment without me. They couldn't touch it without me. They couldn't even access the equity without my consent. For the first time since this nightmare began, hope rose in my chest like a soft, steady flame. By evening, I had a binder organized. Notes, photos, copies, dates, accounts. A record no one could dismiss. And sitting at the front inside a transparent sleeve, I placed the single piece of evidence that tied everything together, the chocolate box. I closed the binder and rested my hands on top of it. I wasn't done. Tomorrow, I would show the world who was actually confused in this story. The opportunity for truth arrived sooner than I expected. 2 days later, I received a call from the hospital. A nurse from the ER asked me to come in for a follow-up discussion about the cluster incident. Her tone was polite but serious. She also asked if any other family members could attend. I said no, firmly. This was my appointment. When I entered the small consultation room, 3 people were already waiting: a doctor, a social worker, and a hospital quality officer. Their presence meant one thing. They had found a pattern worth questioning. The doctor began, "We've reviewed toxicology reports from all 4 patients." My heart thudded once, hard. The results show a contaminant consistent across all samples. Not life-threatening, but certainly not something that belongs in food. The social worker added gently, "We need your version of events." The moment she said "your version," something inside me straightened. At last, someone was asking me. I reached into my bag and placed my binder on the table. I opened it slowly, deliberately, turning it so they could see. Then I slid forward the first page, the photos of the chocolate box, the wrapper, the card, the timestamps. The doctor leaned closer. The social worker took notes. The quality officer murmured, "She documented everything." I explained each step calmly, as though I were giving a report on a hospital shift. I described the night I collapsed, the ambulance ride, the identical symptoms across all 4 of us, the timeline of when the chocolates were eaten, Vanessa's history of belittling my health, her fabricated incident list, the pressure to move into assisted living, the sudden urgency to sell my apartment. Then I placed the next sheet in front of them, the copy of my deed, showing the trust clause. "The apartment cannot legally be sold without my explicit consent," I said. My daughter-in-law didn't know that. She simply assumed control was possible if I looked frail. A quiet stillness filled the room. The doctor finally asked, "Mrs. Harris, are you implying the chocolates were tampered with intentionally?" I held his gaze. "I am stating that nothing about the timing or behavior of my family aligns with an accident." The social worker flipped through the notes. "Your records are consistent, clear, organized." "Because that is who I am," I said, not the confused woman they described. The door opened and suddenly Michael stepped inside. My breath caught. He looked disheveled, anxious, and confused. "Mom, they called me. They said something didn't add up." His voice shook. "What's going on?" The doctor gestured for him to sit. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse or dramatize. I simply opened the binder to the page showing Vanessa's fabricated incident list. Michael stared. At the first lie, then the next, and the next. "This isn't true," he whispered. "No," I said softly. "It never was." He swallowed hard, color draining from his face. "Why would she—" But before he could finish, the doctor spoke. "Mr. Harris, your wife changed her explanation 3 separate times about the chocolates. She first said she never ate any, then said she only had one, then admitted she ate several. The story is inconsistent." Michael closed his eyes. The social worker added, "Your children were exposed to the same contaminant your mother consumed. That is extremely concerning." This time, Michael didn't defend Vanessa. He didn't excuse her. He didn't look away. He whispered, "Mom, I'm so sorry." But the twist wasn't finished. The door opened again, and Vanessa walked in with flushed cheeks and an attempt at indignation. "Why am I being questioned like a criminal? This is ridiculous." The quality officer cut her off. "Please sit." Her eyes darted to the binder. She recognized it instantly. The documentation she never expected I would have. I turned a page, a printed transcript, the message thread where she complained about having to babysit an old woman and joked that a stomach episode would finally prove her point. Vanessa froze. Her expression shattered. The doctor looked at her sharply. "Is this your message?" She stammered. "It was just a joke. You're taking everything too seriously." The room went painfully quiet. The quality officer's voice was firm. "Your family might have been exposed to deliberate contamination. Both Child Protective Services and Adult Protective Services will be conducting follow-up interviews." It was the first time Vanessa didn't have an answer. She wasn't in control. She wasn't performing. She wasn't leading the narrative. She looked small. Michael turned to her, voice breaking. "Did you do something to the chocolates?" Vanessa's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no sound came out. and that silence was louder than any confession. Her performance collapsed, her certainty dissolved, her power evaporated right there on the tiled hospital floor. The social worker turned toward me. "Mrs. Harris, thank you for bringing all of this. We will ensure you are protected moving forward." Protected. A word I hadn't heard directed at me in a long time. For the first time since all of this began, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. The narrative had shifted. The room had shifted. The power had shifted. And none of it belonged to Vanessa anymore. The days following the hospital meeting moved slowly, like time itself was giving each truth the space it needed to settle and become undeniable. For once, no one rushed to control the narrative. Not Michael, not Vanessa, not the people who had once pitied me after listening to her stories. A few mornings later, I received a call from the social worker assigned to our case. Her voice was steady, warm, and decisive. The voice of someone who had seen situations like this before. "Mrs. Harris, the investigation has produced some findings we need to go over with you." I agreed to come in. When I arrived at her office, the room felt different from the last time we spoke. There was no haze of doubt over her eyes, no assessing glances, no gentle probing questions to see if I understood what was happening around me. She knew exactly who I was now, a capable woman, a wronged woman, a woman who had been underestimated by the very people who should have protected her. She motioned for me to sit. "We've spoken to the hospital staff, the toxicology team, the landlord, and your family." I folded my hands in my lap and waited. The toxicology report confirms the contaminant was the same in all 4 samples. The doctor concluded it could not have been an accidental ingredient. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. The social worker continued, "Child Protective Services has opened a parallel case due to the children's exposure. Their investigator noted inconsistencies in your daughter-in-law's statements, 3 different versions of the same event." My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the slow, quiet ache of betrayal finally being acknowledged out loud. "We've also reviewed the notes your daughter-in-law submitted to your landlord and doctor," she said. "None of the incidents she listed could be verified. In fact, several contradict your recent medical evaluations." I nodded. I told them none of that was true. "And now we know," she said gently. She reached into a folder and slid a form across the table. "We're recommending that all decisions regarding your health and living situation remain fully under your control. No power of attorney will be granted to any family member." Relief washed through me, steady and calm. "Additionally," she said, "we've advised your landlord that you remain capable of living independently. There will be no further conversations about forcing a move." For the first time in weeks, I felt something lift from my shoulders, the crushing weight of someone else's version of my future. Then she added, "There is one more recommendation." I raised my eyes to hers. "We strongly advise that your son and daughter-in-law have no access to your medical or financial information going forward. They have demonstrated significant conflicts of interest, and their actions show attempts to manipulate your independence." I sat very still. There was no triumph in me, only truth settling quietly where lies had once stood. At the end of the meeting, the social worker said something I will never forget. "You were right to document. You were right to speak up. Most people don't. You protected yourself in ways many are too frightened to attempt." Her words felt like a small blessing. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. I walked slowly to the bus stop, my binder tucked under my arm. The world felt lighter, but not because justice had been loud. Justice, in my case, arrived quietly. In documents corrected, in authority figures shifting their understanding, in lies exposed without me raising my voice. Later that afternoon, Michael came to my apartment alone. He looked tired, older, as though the truth had carved new lines into his face. "I talked to the investigator," he said. "They told me everything." I didn't respond. I waited. His voice cracked. "Mom, I cannot believe she put our kids at risk. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," I said softly. He ran a hand through his hair. "She wants to explain things. She wants to talk to you." I shook my head. "No, I'm not opening that door again." He swallowed hard, but he didn't argue. Not this time. "I'm moving out," he finally said. "With the kids. I don't know where things will end with her, but they won't be around her until this is resolved." That was consequence enough for me, the kind that came naturally when truth revealed itself. Before he left, he asked, "Is there anything you need?" I looked around my apartment. My plants, my quilt, my framed photo of my husband, my clean kitchen, my quiet living room. Everything was mine again, my space, my safety, my life. "No," I said. "I have everything I need." When the door closed behind him, I exhaled a long, steady breath. Justice had not been loud or flashy. Nobody was dragged away in handcuffs. There were no courtroom speeches, no dramatic confessions. What happened was quieter, more fitting for a woman like me. Truth became undeniable. Her version collapsed. My independence was restored. Her access was removed. The children were protected. And everyone now knew who had been telling the truth all along. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity, and it was enough. Several months passed before the dust around my life finally settled into something steady again. Not perfect, not picture book, peaceful, just steady. For a woman my age, steadiness is a gift worth more than apology, reconciliation, or even acknowledgement from those who wronged her. The seasons shifted quietly. Winter thinned into spring. My strength returned, along with my appetite, my walks, my confidence, my clarity. I rearranged my apartment one slow afternoon, moving my favorite armchair toward the window so the morning light would fall directly across the pages of whatever book I chose to read. I donated clothes I no longer needed, planted herbs on my windowsill, and let myself enjoy the soft hum of a life that belonged entirely to me. I found new routines without even meaning to. I joined a morning walking group made up mostly of retired women from the neighborhood. Some were widows, some divorced, some simply choosing solitude after a lifetime of caring for others. None of them knew the full story of what had happened with Vanessa, but they didn't need to. They only needed to know me as I was now. Someone who valued conversation, fresh air, a good laugh, and the slow, steady rhythm of feet on pavement. On Saturdays, I attended a small crafting circle at the community center. I never considered myself an artist, but I found a particular peace in weaving together strands of yarn that didn't look like much alone, but created something sturdy when joined. In a quiet way, it reminded me of rebuilding a life, one thread at a time, one decision at a time, one peaceful morning at a time. My relationship with Michael did not heal instantly. Trust, once cracked, does not fall back into place like puzzle pieces, but he visited often, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone. He apologized more times than I needed him to. Not grand speeches, quiet moments, helping me fix a loose drawer, bringing groceries without announcing it. Sitting beside me during a movie he didn't particularly like, just because he wanted to be near me. And every time, I saw guilt flicker in his eyes. The guilt of a son who realized too late he had listened to the wrong person. I didn't press him to talk about it. I didn't demand explanations or emotional confrontations. I simply allowed the slow repair of a bond I had spent decades building. I forgave him privately, before he even asked, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. The grandchildren changed too. Children notice more than adults think. After everything settled, they began calling me more often, sending me silly little videos of their school projects, drawings, and weekend adventures. When they visited, they hugged me harder than before. They didn't mention their mother's behavior. They didn't need to. Their affection was its own quiet statement. As for Vanessa, I did not see her again. Not once. She did not call, did not write, did not show up at my door pretending to reconcile. Perhaps she felt shame. Perhaps she remained angry that her plans had failed. Perhaps she feared more questions from the authorities. I never asked Michael for updates about her, and he rarely volunteered them. Our lives no longer crossed, and I was content to let that separation remain exactly as it was. During that time, I made one of the most important decisions of my later years. I rewrote my estate plan completely, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I placed everything into a structured trust, managed by a neutral professional. The apartment, savings, insurance, investments, all secured, all protected, all unreachable by anyone with personal interest. The grandchildren would benefit from it one day, but only for education and genuine needs, and only under strict oversight. Michael understood. He didn't fight it. He didn't even flinch. He simply said, "I want you safe, Mom. Do whatever feels right." And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. My life now was simple, but not small. I woke when I pleased. I ate when I was hungry. I spent afternoons reading on the balcony, listening to the birds argue in the trees. I cooked meals that reminded me of my younger years. Soups that simmered for hours, casseroles with too much cheese, desserts I used to make when the kids were little. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, just a life that was mine again. Sometimes, when evening settled and the apartment grew quiet, I thought about the night I collapsed on the bathroom floor. How close I came to losing everything, not because of illness, but because of someone else's ambition. And I thought about how easily I could have vanished inside someone else's story if I hadn't held on to the one thing that saved me, my own voice. Now, months later, my hands no longer shook when I held a pen. My mind no longer clouded with self-doubt planted by someone else's convenience. My heart no longer flinched at the sound of a knock on the door. I was grounded, and I no longer carried the weight of fixing anyone, proving anything, or reclaiming someone else's version of me. I had stepped out of the past and into a life I chose. Steady, dignified, peaceful. A life no one could take from me again. When I look back on everything that happened, I don't feel rage anymore. What I feel is something quieter, something older, something steadier. It is the understanding that harm from within a family carries a different weight than harm from the outside. Outsiders can wound you, yes, but when it is your own child or the person they choose to build a life with, the cut goes deeper. It breaks something beneath the surface, something you once believed was unshakable. I spent weeks after the investigation wondering how I missed the warning signs, wondering if I had encouraged too much dependence, wondering if love had made me blind in the places where I needed to be watchful. But the truth is simple, and it took time for me to say it without shame. Trust does not mean surrendering your life. Love does not mean giving others the right to define you. I used to think protecting my independence made me difficult. I used to think asking questions made me ungrateful. I used to think standing my ground would hurt the people I cared about. But I learned something different. Something I want every older woman to hear clearly. Keeping control of your documents, your accounts, your choices, and your space is not selfish. It is responsible. It is necessary. It is the only way to make sure your future is shaped by truth, not by someone else's plans. If anyone listening has noticed their voice getting smaller in their own household, if decisions are being made for you instead of with you, if you are being talked over, dismissed, or gently steered into choices you did not ask for, please pause. Listen to that inner tug. It is not confusion. It is not weakness. It is wisdom trying to protect you. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be respected. You deserve to live on your own terms as long as you are capable. And most of us are far more capable than people assume. My story did not end with a dramatic victory. It ended with truth. boundaries, and a life that is finally peaceful again. And that is enough. Before we finish, I would love to know where you are listening from. If stories like this help you feel seen or help you trust your own voice a little more, feel free to subscribe to her Legacy Tales for more real stories about women protecting their dignity and future. Thank you for spending this time with me.